In this video, let's go over some of the things we can do to set up our Blender file so it's easier for sculpting. So here I got the default Blender open. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust some of the settings. Right, so to adjust the Blender preferences, we need to go to the edit over here and then go to preferences. Now, alternatively, we can use the F4 function key and we get the file context menu and go to preferences over here. Clicking on this will open the Blender preferences window. Now let's adjust these settings so we're ready for sculpting. So the first thing I'd like to change over here is going to be under the navigation tab. So let's go to the navigation settings. Now the navigation settings can be quite personal depending on how you feel most comfortable navigating around the viewport. So don't feel you have to have the same settings as I have, but the first setting I'm going to change is going to be the orbit around selection. What this does is set the pivot point of the rotation on the last object that we have selected, or when we're sculpting, it's going to be on the last section that we've sculpted. The next setting I want to adjust is going to be the depth, so I want to enable that. So what this does, it limits our zooming depending on the depth or distance between the camera and the object. So now with that, I also want to enable the zoom to mouse position. What this does is it will zoom to wherever the mouse cursor is. So this gives us a bit more control on the navigation side of things. So the next settings I want to adjust are going to be under key map. So let's go there. So the settings I want to change over here is going to be the spacebar action setting. So currently it's set to play, which means when we press the spacebar right now, it will start playing the timeline. As we're going to be sculpting, this is not going to be very useful to us. So let's set it to tools. So what this does is now when we press spacebar, we'll get all the tools available to us over there so you can quickly jump between whatever sculpting tool. Now an additional thing I want to change over here is going to be the tab for Pi menu. Enabling this means when we press tab, we can quickly jump between the modes. So edit mode, sculpt mode, and object mode. So pressing tab brings up a Pi menu and we can select whatever mode we need. Now the next setting is going to be under system. Here I want to increase the undo steps. This will give us a bigger range of errors. So when we make mistakes, we can go back further. So let's increase this as high as we can. So it's going to be 256 steps. Now the next setting I want to adjust are going to be under the save and load. So let's go over here. And we want to enable compress file. So what this does is it compresses our blend files to be smaller size to save up on storage. Now we're going to be sculpting in this course and files tend to become quite large. So to compress those will save us a lot of storage. Now the other thing I want to adjust is going to be the save versions. So what this does is when we save or overwrite a save, so have a save with the same name, it makes a backup of the previous blend save and adds a number to it. So you get a .blend and then a number. So .blend1, .blend2, etc. up to the number you've set here. Now the negatives of this is obviously you get a lot of duplicates of your blend file. So a lot of people like to set it to 0, which means it will not make any backups. But if you're like me and you're clumsy and you'd like to go back to your previous blend file maybe after being too enthusiastic with the Control-S for saving, you might want to set this to a higher number. I'm going to set it to 5 for myself, but depending on your needs and your circumstances, you might want to adjust that. So those are all the settings I want to adjust for now in the Blender preferences. Let's now go to the next part where we're going to add some custom matcaps to Blender. Now to start off, you need to download the matcap files in a link below this video, and then locate your Blender installation folder. Hey, this is Jim from the future. Man, did I record audio different before. Anyway, there is an easier way to install matcaps than what I was showing in this video, so let me show you how to install matcaps. Now, previously I was going to show you how to go into the data files and add the matcaps manually there, but we can actually do something a lot easier. If we go over here to our viewport settings, you can see we can switch between the light modes. And if we go to matcap here, you can see we have this little cog item. So if we click on this over here, we get into our Blender preferences, and over here under lights, you can see we can install new matcaps. So let's click this install button. Now over here to locate the matcaps that you've downloaded, so let's locate that folder here. Now once you open the matcap folder, you might notice that it says no items. Now don't panic, this is okay. The problem here is that Blender is looking for a specific file type for these matcaps. Now the matcaps that I have here are of a different file type, so to see these, we need to disable the filter. So let's click on this filter button over here, and right away you can see we now have all of our matcaps visible. So let's now select all of these, and let's then press the install button. Now as you can see right away, we have installed all of our matcaps here. If we now close this and go to our viewport settings, you can see we now have all of these different matcaps available to us to use for our projects. So that's enough from future Jim here. So I'm going to bring you back to past Jim. So now with that done, we can move on to the next step where we're going to go and customize our sculpting brushes. Right, so to add our custom brushes, we'll first need to change our default cube into an icosphere. So let's delete the default cube and add in a icosphere. We'll be using this icosphere to test our brushes. So let's increase the subdivisions. I'm going to set quite high. I'm going to set to 9. Let's load for a bit. There we are. And zoom in onto our icosphere. Here we go. So we're going to test our brushes on this object. So we're going to go to sculpt mode. But instead of going up here, what we can do, remember we changed our settings. If we now hold tab, we can quickly jump between all the modes. Let's go to sculpt mode. Right, now that we're in sculpt mode, let's adjust some of our brushes. Now the first brush I want to adjust is the crease brush, since I use it the most to define some of the shapes. So let's go to our crease brush. So I can select here, or again, I can use space to jump really fast between them, or use the hotkeys. Let's go to crease. I'm going to open the N panel. So holding N, we get the N panel over here. And I'm going to click tool. So we get all our tool settings right here in the window. We can also go up here to get our tool settings, but I prefer over here in the M panel. So if we have a look at this brush, if we sculpt now, I'm going to increase the strength. You can see if I draw this, we get a nice creasy look, but we don't get the crease that we see in this image. You could try to duplicate this effect by increasing the pinch and lowering the strength and going over a particular area, but as you can see, it destroys the geometry over here. So this is not exactly what we want. So let's fix this. Let's customize this so it works for us. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce the pinch. I'm going to set back to 0.5, strength to 1, and we're going to add a texture. The textures we're going to be using are the textures you can download below this video, below the Matcap download. Now, as soon as you got those textures downloaded, make sure you put them in a place you can easily find, as we're going to be using these textures throughout the course for these brushes. So let's now create a new brush and use a texture for them. So we're going to press this little 2 over here, which will make a duplicate of the brush. We can now rename this. So let's rename this standard. So now we'll add a texture to this one. So let's create a new texture. Now we have a texture created here. We're going to call it crease standard as well. And we're going to click this little shield over here. What this does, it creates a fake user for the texture. So even when the texture is not assigned to any particular object or brush, it will not get deleted or eliminated when we close Blender. So this will keep the texture safe. So now if we go to the texture window over here, so we have the texture properties panel. So we can go here and open a texture. So now we're going to go and find the location. So I'm going to go to the location where I have the texture saved. So let's now go and open the crease standard.png. I'm going to open that. And now the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change the color space from sRGB to non-color, because we don't want the color space to be adjusted, as this is a height map like texture. It has a curve to it. So instead of using the fall off curves within Blender, I've created these textures using a fall off within Photoshop. So now when we draw, you can see we do not get the desired result we want. We get these weird points in space. Now this is because we've set the mapping to tiled over here. So let's have a look. Over here it's set to tiled. So let's set that to area plane. You can see I get the texture to follow my brush strokes. Now next problem is that the texture is now vertical. It's not following the brush stroke. So to fix that, let's reset the sphere and select rake. So now we draw. You can see it's following the stroke. So we're getting close, but we're not there yet. As you can see, we're pushing in still too far. This is because the texture I'm using, as I said before, is a height map based texture. So it has a curve to it, which can both be additive and subtractive. So a value of 0.5 is the mid level. So if I now set the sample bias to 0.5, let's reset the sphere. If I draw, we get this nice effect. But we can see we still have this nasty spacing problem over here. So let's go fix that. So we go to stroke, and under spacing, the first thing we're going to change is from view to scene. Now if we draw, you can see we fixed these issues on the stepping on the edges, but we still have a bit of this stepping going on over here. So to fix this, we can reduce the spacing between the steps. So let's reduce it to about 5%. So if we draw now, we get this really smooth line. Hey, it's me again. This is a part that some got stuck on, so I'm going to add a few more details just in case you get stuck on how to make these brushes. So some got stuck a bit on the texture part for these brushes, so imagine here I'm adding the crease wrinkle brush. Now first I need to change the color space to non-color just so Blender doesn't change the profile of this image since it's already adjusted by me beforehand, so we don't want Blender to mess with that. Now next up, we need to adjust the mapping of the texture, so we want it to follow the brush, so let's set it to area plane. So now it follows the brush, and I want to set it to rake so it follows the orientation of the brush stroke. So now we got the texture following and also rotating with our strokes. This is what we want. Now next up, this is a part that some got stuck on as well, which is the sample bias. Now what does this sample bias do? Well, it basically sets the floor level for the texture when it comes to the where it's going to use the sculpting effect from the brush. So if I set the strength to 1 now, and let me clear this here and then draw, you can see it pushes everything in, even on the sides where I don't want it to push in. So this is this gray part within the texture. Now this gray part here is a value of 0.5. So if I now set the sample bias to be 0.5, it will now have the floor at this level. So now if I draw, you can see where we have the gray on the texture, it's not going to actually push in anymore. Now the benefits of this is that if I set a value below 0.5, it will do the opposite effect of our brush. So in this case with the wrinkle brush, some parts actually get pushed up while other parts get pushed down with this crease brush. So basically we're using a height map technique here to create these interesting brush strokes. Now what about the grab brush? Well, here we're going to do pretty much the same. So let's create a duplicate here of the grab brush. And let's rename this to grab smooth since we have a grab smooth texture. So let's add a new texture here. Let's also call this grab smooth. Let's now change the mapping here to go to area plane. Now we don't have to enable rake since we're not going to be making any strokes with this brush. We're just going to be grabbing stuff. So we don't have to enable rake. So all that's left to do now is to change the sample bias to 0.5. Now over here in our properties panel, let's now find our grab smooth texture. And let's now set the color space to non-color just so it doesn't adjust any of the values. And now we can just use our grab brush with this new texture so we have this smoother fall off. Now to compare this with the normal grab brush, let's go over here. Let's swap to the normal grab brush. Now if I drag this, you can see we have quite a harsh grabbing effect here. And if I now go back to the grab smooth, you can see it's a lot smoother. So it's just a simple matter of adding these textures to these brushes. So we have these sort of profiles for these tools. So we can easily swap between them and have these different profiles for like sharper crease brushes or smoother grab brushes when we do sculpting. Now, I hope with this you kind of have a rough idea of how this all works. So let me now drop you off back with Past Gym. So now I've added all these brushes. If I have a look over here, you can see we have about 7 brushes. So let's go over these brushes so we kind of have an idea of what their functions are. So to start off, we have a cut brush. It's very similar to the standard brush. If I go, you can see it has this very similar effect as the normal crease brush, but it has a nice sharp point to it. Let's go to the next one, which is a sharp crease brush. What this does, it basically has a very harsh point to it. This is great for trying to get really sharp details. So let's have a look at anything else. We've got the soft brush. Now this is the opposite of the sharp brush. What this does, it pushes in the surface nice and softly. It doesn't have a sharp point to it. And then we have the softer brush, which is basically even softer. So when we draw this one, you can see it draws into the surface nice and softly. Then we go to the standard brush. We've used this before. This is the one I tend to use more than all the other ones. So if I look, it has a nice sharpness to it, but not that sharp that it feels like you've cut into the surface. Now the final one is the wrinkle brush. This is for more organic surfaces. So if we go over here and we draw, we can see we got this pushing up effect on the edges of the crease. Now this is the benefit of using height maps. As you can see, I both push up and I push down at the same time. So when we intersect, we get this nice, really nice organic effect. So this brush is very useful when we start working with organic based surfaces. So now I've added all the grab brushes. We can have a look at them. So we have our standard smooth that we added before. We have our smooth pitch, which is going to be a sharper grab. It's very subtle, but it's sharper, which can be useful. And then we have our wide. So this is a very wide grab brush. So these give us a bit more flexibility when we want to pull and push into certain surfaces. So now that we have our brushes ready, we can go and jump on to the next video, which is going to be setting up the scene before we start blocking out the character.